Hi, and welcome to Linus Napoleonic Shipyard. Today we're doing a little bit more scripted deep dive again, and I'm usually doing these out of interest, and one of my main interests, and again since my fleet for Black Seas is mainly British, it is going to be a mainly British perspective again. So we're going to talk about non-US or non-United States super frigates of the Napoleonic Wars and also the French Revolutionary Wars. So the development of the heavier frigates through early French experimental frigates, and then up to examples like Endymion, and then the heavier Razées or the converted East Indiamen. So basically these were too big to be ordinary frigates and too small to stand in the line of battle. Fast enough, though, to change the outcome of war, and also playing a great role in the colonies, basically. So in the East Indies and the Indies and overseas in general. Some press would call it super frigates, like the American super frigates. Basically, I would call them heavy frigates, or when they're a Razée, or converted Indiamen. A handful of really remarkable ships that really blurred the rating boundaries. And then, as I mentioned, early French innovations that inspired them, then how the British copied the concepts, and then how it was converted over time. And basically an arms race that culminated in some of the quickest, hardest hitting cruisers in the age of, or of the age of sail, I should say. So this is the story of Endymion, Pomone, Indefatigable, Majestic, HMS Cornwallis, and many more. In the late 18th century, a typical frigate carried long 18-pounders on a single cover deck, with lighter guns, or later on carronades, above. In the 1790s and early 1800s, several navies experimented with heavier hulls and longer ships, and also a 24-pounder main battery on the frigate platform. Some went even further, raséing older ships of the line, literally cutting down a two-decker to create a massively built fast cruiser with frigate handling and line of the battle ship durability. These ships were not just paper monsters like you would think. They were actually problem solvers. They chased commerce, bullied privateers, scouted for the fleets, escorted convoys, and of course single ship actions, which were their essay. And there they would overmatch standard frigates. They were expensive, of course, maintenance hungry, and sometimes controversial in doctrine, but they filled a real need between the 18-pounder frigate and the fourth rate, which by this point had become a little bit of an aged concept. You had in the line, the small ships in the line were the 64s, right? But already in the Napoleonic War, these were already then becoming too small, and the 74 was the standard. And then when you were on far stations, the fourth rate would still play a role, but slowly phased out. So that's where we're at this point. I would say the French might have supplied the key spark. In 1794, a British squadron captured a French 40-gun frigate called the Pomone. She was one of design, but was a bit of a revelation to her captors. She had 26 long 24-pounders on the main deck, and also above that she had outstanding sailing qualities across the wind. So the British surveyor took her lines, and the Admiralty ordered copies, and the result of this would become legendary, with Endymion for instance. The impression Pomone made was not just about weight and metal, as I said, it was about the combination. A fine hull form, long run, stability enough to use the heavy long guns at speed, and in a world where most frigates still carried 18-pounders, Pomone pointed to a new ceiling for the cruising warship. Enter Endymion, a 40-gun, 24-pounder heavy frigate, launched in 1797. Laid down to Pomone's captured lines, and strengthened to British standards, HMS Endymion, launched in 1797, as mentioned, proved an even faster ship than the French original, reportedly making over 14 knots, which was extraordinary speed for the era. The exact, we'll get to that, but it might be a little bit some controversy there, but a very fast ship at any rate. Endymion became the template for a small family of British 24-pounder frigates, and later, under wartime pressure, for the fur-built batch during the 1813 and 1814. Endymion's famous night came late in the War of 1812. On January 15th, 1815, off New York, as she ran down the American ship USS President, herself a heavy 44-gun frigate, one of the American super-frigates, and engaged her closely, caught her up aloft and forced her out of her sailing line, more or less, and giving the bigger British squadron time to arrive. And when they did, the President struck. There's a lot of controversy here, and we'll get to that, but basically the story that I believe is the right is that actually President actually struck two Endymion before the rest of the squadron actually had time to catch up. Part of that squadron, I should mention, is another one of the ships that we are going to go through, a very heavy Razée 74 HMS Majestic, who were also active earlier in the engagement. And I mean, the narratives agree that Endymion's role in any case was decisive and a good point for that type of ship. So Endymion embodied a British answer to these heavier opponents, the American super frigates or the heavy frigates, and had superior sailing from the French-inspired hull, but with a little bit more strength and the 24-pounders long-range hitting power. Of course, also at the close range, she carried quite a few carronades. So all over, a very good ship by all accounts. So, and that is probably a little bit of a rare compliment for a design that is born to what you call a wartime urgency, right? This is a response or a build up to something. And that leads us to the next point, which is the Razée. So the idea of the Razée is to, and this might have scandalized purists, and of course hard driving captains would probably be delighted, like Pellew for instance. It was the Razée. So the first instance is the Royal Navy took older 64-gun ships of the line that were being phased out by the 74s, and then cut away their upper works to produce enormous frigates. The goal was practical. Older, smaller two-deckers were outclassed in the line of battle, but their start frames would allow them to carry 24-pounders, and later on, as we will see with Majestic, 32-pounder long guns, and of course heavy carronades, but as cruisers in a cruiser role. In 1794, 3 64s were received: Indefatigable, Anson, and Magnanime. The most famous was, of course, Indefatigable, that under Sir Edward Pellew, and of course Sir Edward Pellew is a name they still spoke with respect whenever ship models and every historians gather, and is featured in Homeblower, among other. Was the captain of her during a long time and did some pretty remarkable stuff, capturing so many prizes. We have to mention that the same logic that produced Indefatigable in 1794 returned during the War of 1812. So in 1813 they would cut down larger ships, and that would be one of them would be the Majestic, and you would end up with an even heavier frigate with a 32-pounder long gun main deck. Up until I think 1798, Pellew was commanding the Indefatigable, and you could call, sometimes it's called Pellew's hammer, Indefatigable. And she, as converted into Razée, was a 44-gun heavy frigate, and she had 26 long 24-pounders on her upper or now main deck, and then 32-pounder carronades above that. I mean, she probably proved exactly what Razées could be. Thunderous, heavy at close quarters, durable in heavy weather and fast enough to choose her fights. So to get out from under larger ships of the line, but to be able to run down most of the contemporary frigates. The action that made a legend of her came on the 13th of January 1797. In an Atlantic gale off the Breton coast, Indefatigable and the frigate Amazon, which was a more standard 18-pounder fifth-rate frigate, fought the French 74 Droits through the night. The sea was so rough that the French could not safely open the lower deck ports, having their effective broadside more than halved, so the 32-pounders were not available to the French ship. Pellew and Reynolds raked, wore and battered the bigger ship until all three vessels found themselves driving onto lee shore. Indefatigable managed to claw off. Amazon was grounded, but the crew, I remember all of the crew survived, whereas Droits broke up on the shore with extremely heavy casualties. So this episode, if not before, really proved a little bit how, if handled right, these ships could be very decisive. I mean, it was not a parade ground duel by any rate, and of course the weather played a huge role. I mean, it was a brutal, long test in filthy weather. But it probably convinced many in Whitehall that Razées, if handled boldly, could change the frigate war. By late 1812, the Admiralty had a practical problem, and this was the American 44-gun frigates, with their long 24-pounders that had outmatched several British 18-pounder frigates. The quick fix was not to wait for new construction, but maybe to cut down a few elderly 74s. So now we're moving up in size, and this would become massive spar-decked frigates that could carry 32-pounder long guns and heavy carronades. And these carronades, I think there are 42-pounder carronades on the main deck. So you wouldn't want to get close to any of these things. And then they would use these ships to throw around on the blockade and in single ship fights. In 1813, the Navy received 3 74s, including HMS Majestic and also HMS Saturn, explicitly to meet the American threat. Contemporary and modern summaries make the link clear. Conversion began in January 1813 for Majestic at Chatham, with the intent to produce a true heavy frigate or super heavy frigate. As a Razée, Majestic was rated at 58 guns and a fourth rate, often described in reports maybe between 57 to 58 guns or 56 to 58 guns. She retained her 32-pounder long guns, as I said. That would be now her main battery, and then mounted, as I said earlier, 42-pounder carronades above this. So immense short-range weapons that gave her a crushing upper deck throw weight. The concept mirrored in her sister Razées such as Saturn. Big batteries, stout scantlings, and enough speed to maybe split up pairs of enemy frigates or small squadrons and force action, where the heavy broadside weight would tell. So more on Majestic then. By 1813, with the war of 1812, and the American 44s inflicting single ship defeats, the Admiralty expanded the Razée program with those elderly 74s, as mentioned. And this was proving right, as on the 3rd of February 1840, HMS Majestic, commanded by John Hayes, and this was not on the American station, but against the French, but she engaged 2 French frigates, and none of these were small frigates. It was the Terpsichore and the Admiralty, and they also had some consorts. And what happened was that Hayes drove off Admiralty and then captured Terpsichore, and that was after a sustained, I think, 2.5-hour action. But the thing is that there was minimal British losses, at least if you should believe the propaganda. But there was no serious damage to the ship. I mean, I tried to look for dockyard records, like if there was any repairs done. I couldn't find any. But the contemporary sources state that there was minimal losses. So weight and stamina and speed to force the action and then finish it. And that's with a single ship against many opponents. So contemporary prints and official notes record the result. Captain Hayes' report circulated widely in the press, cementing Majestic as a showpiece of the 1813 Razée program. Majestic's short Razée career shows exactly why the type appealed in 1813-14. Quick to convert, fearsome at close range, and psychologically useful after the blow struck by Constitution, United States and President on the smaller fifth-rate frigates. So basically we would call the American frigates maybe the catalyst for this larger. So the urgency for the big frigates by 1812 was because the United States had for a long time, from the beginning actually, as they built their first larger frigates, oversized them. So they were 44-gun frigates with those 24-pounders, as I mentioned many times now. That is the main, one of the main points of this whole video, is this heavier armament, the broadside weight. And also those heavy carronades carried above. So they were designed to outgun any frigate and outrun a ship of the line. And when handled well, they were deadly. So they used this Constitution's wartime battery, and I've mentioned this in another video. It was 30 long 24s on the gun deck, and then 32-pounder carronades above that. And this is documented. You can find it in the ship's own museum, among other things. And I mean, British 18-pounder frigates could and did beat American ships in the right day, but the weight to shot imbalance was real. So you will have a duel, like I mentioned many times, the Chesapeake versus the Shannon. But the Chesapeake was not one of those true heavy frigates. It was not one of those 44-gun frigates. That was actually built to a slightly smaller design. So for those really large American frigates, the Brits, they needed an answer. And of course, this also included, except for the Razées, as I mentioned earlier, ships like the Endymion, with those 24-pounders that maybe should be able to meet those 44s on their own terms. The Endymion family then of ships, I mean, once the war with the United States became likely, the Admiralty ordered more of them, 5 fur-built Endymion type frigates in 1813-14. And these were quicker to build, slightly modified, but rated for 24-pounders on the main deck. And they were not intended to last a long time. This is like a wartime expediency. They wouldn't last long in hard sea service. But they filled the roster when the need validated that this solution, that the Endymion class of ships was, worked in practice. So they were like a bridge. After 1815, the frigate would keep growing. But the idea that a true cruiser could legitimately carry 24-pounders or even 32s, like in the case of some Razées, had become common sense in the Royal Navy. So there was a change during this period to those heavier frigates. And this leads off to a little bit of a tangent, because there was another way to do things as well that did happen a few times, where some of those very large and well-built Indiamen were bought by the Royal Navy and converted into cruisers. So alongside the Razées, they bought those Indiamen and converted them to fourth rates. I would, in some cases like Cornwallis, like I'm going to mention, call them also heavy frigates, because they're more cruisers in the way they're built. And the battery, the armament is very similar, with heavy 24-pounders and really heavy 32-pounder carronades on the upper decks usually. So you have the HMS Cornwallis. That was before it was named HMS Cornwallis, was Marquis Cornwallis, and that was a teak-built ship built for the East India Company by Pomone. I'm not sure, I'll probably butcher that. And it was purchased in 1805 under Sir Edward Pellew, and then later on in service it was renamed HMS Akbar. It served widely in the Indian Ocean and also in the East Indies, and actually had a very distinguished career serving there with a lot of captures and prizes taken, and also serving in some larger strategic actions. After this, she was converted to a troop ship and a harbor training ship. Another one, the HMS Calcutta, ex-Worley, was purchased in 1795 and refitted to a 56-gun fourth rate. And she served on convoy escort, transport service, and a famous capture by a French 74, with her ultimate destruction at Basque Roads in 1809. So more examples of quick conversions where you end up with a cruiser. And actually the model that I'm showing here on off, the HMS Cornwallis, is one of my first heavy frigates that I built. It's actually still one of my favorites. The rigging is not up to par anymore. It might up becoming one of the ships that I sell because I might want to remake it with updated rigging and so on. But it's still a very nice model, I think, and then also a good representative of another way of ending up with a heavy fourth rate cruiser or a heavy frigate. So another shortcut to mass, big hulls, quick conversions, and just enough battery to stiffen distant squadrons, and then later on with this purpose-built heavy frigates and the Razées. So a super frigate was just not a gun list. I mean, it was hull and rig. Longer waterlines meant higher practical speed. Heavier scantlings meant the hull could carry big, long guns without working itself to pieces. Stability mattered, as a 24-pounder was only an advantage if you could keep it level enough to hit the opponent, right? And then there was the tactical doctrine. Razées, like Indefatigable, were happiest at pistol shot range, raking, sharing off spars, or battering opponents who could not open the lower ports, like the Droits de l'Homme. And Endymion type frigates were built to run down a target and dictate the terms of the action. So with this very long, sleek, fast hull. The 1815 chase of the President is an archetype of this. So there is some myths around this. And I think we should be always careful, and especially me, not being a historian, when you should take everything I say with a dose of, a big dose of, because, I'm just a hobbyist. But we have this story with the Endymion being the fastest ship in the Royal Navy, and she's like often called that. Her recorded top speeds are among the highest of the era, but the phrasing the fastest is more like a period propaganda or boast than a measured league trial comparison across the fleet. It's a fair repetition, though, that she was a very fast frigate, but was not like an engineering certificate. So, a little bit of a caveat there. And of course then there's the credit for capturing the USS President by Endymion. Often this is by official return and also historical credit by later historians give it the credit to the whole squadron. Of course, Endymion's crippling gunnery and chase is acknowledged. Me reading through it, I do believe, and I still believe, the account where actually the President struck to the Endymion before the rest of the squadron could arrive. Of course, then there was some, but I think ineffectual gunfire by, among others, the HMS Majestic earlier in the engagement. But I think that the reason why she struck was the fight with HMS Indefatigable, and that it actually happened before. But that's my personal opinion reading through. I've been digging into this a little bit, but as a caveat, if we maybe dive into a little bit more. So Just before the peace took hold in the War of 1812, Commodore Stephen Decatur took the USS President out of New York. This was on 14th or 15th January 1815, and there she was met by a British squadron. Endymion was the quickest of all the ships in this squadron. Majestic, due to the way the wind was not as fast as she would be otherwise, and Endymion then managed to overhaul the American and then settle in, like I mentioned earlier, cutaway rigging and spars, un-British fashion, where they usually would be firing on hull, but makes sense in this type of engagement. So as the President's speed fell, the rest of the British could close, and then just before that, Decatur struck the first time. According to the British record, and Decatur's record is something else, and there's a bit of controversy around this. I think if you watch the series by Drachinifel, then he's diving much deeper into all these details on that actual fight. So I recommend you watch that. But it remains a favorite of tacticians because it shows how the speed and the heavy long guns could control range and decide the fight before the final broadside. It also, for the British planners, I think, validated both stands of their response, like the 24-pounder frigates built to Endymion's model, and also the powerful Razées that could meet the 44s on even terms. Another case study, and this is for the Razée, would be that fight that I mentioned earlier, and also in depth and probably better than me has been done by Drachinifel, but I want to mention it here anyway. So that was, and now we're returning in time a little bit, January 1797. It's the Bay of Biscay in a winter gale. Indefatigable and Amazon, HMS Indefatigable and HMS Amazon are under shortened sail. I don't know, sometimes my English. I write this, have some kind of script notes when I do these things, and sometimes it just becomes wrong. So it's HMS Amazon and HMS Indefatigable are under shortened sail. There's sparse flogging, decks awash, and crews exhausted. Ahead of them looms the Droits, which is a 74 with troops aboard returning from the failed Irish invasion there. I think Pellew would reason coldly that the seas would be too heavy for the French to really use her lower gun deck. This was a common problem safely, and that would more than, I think, half the French broadside, turning the 74 into a clumsy rolling demi-ship. So Pellew stays, rakes and wears together with Amazon again and again all through the night, and this is almost like a privateer captain's aggression in a king's ship. And by dawn, the Razée and Amazon have done their work, but the lee shore would do the rest. So, and as I mentioned earlier, Amazon, as they find themselves in that lee shore, unable to get out, except for Indefatigable, they manage to haul off. Amazon is lost, but the crew survive. The French ship of the line there breaks her back and is basically heavy casualties for the troops and the crew. And it's a savage kind of victory, of course, but it kind of cements the Rasée's reputation, right? There is, even if you could count for the weather, something special with two frigates, which it is, even if it's a Razée frigate, taking on a ship of the line and one of the more modern 74s of the French Navy. So another case study, and we're getting back to this ship, is the Majestic that I mentioned many times. So we are on the 3rd of February 1814 and on the Atlantic coast of France. HMS Majestic, a newly Razée 74, bears down on the two French frigates Terpsichore and Atalante, plus an American privateering company. Captain John Hayes uses Majestic's sail power to split the group and then drives off the privateer and Atalante, and then hammers into Terpsichore in a 2.5-hour engagement. The British losses, as mentioned earlier, were minimal, and I mean it kind of shows how the Razées tactical mission in 1814 was basically the brute force heavy cruiser, also even biting into a small enemy squadron. So beyond the rating game, why are these ships then less famous than maybe HMS Victory or the Constitution? Of course, the Constitution is a ship of this class. It's a heavy frigate or a super frigate. One reason these ships survive, right? HMS Victory and Constitution, they're around, you can see them. But also maybe gravity, so fleet actions and national icons draw spotlight. And these heavier frigates and Razées, I mean, I guess for historians or history nerds or gamers, they play a more interesting role. I mean, I didn't know too much about, I knew about the American super frigates, but I didn't know anything about Razées, or just heard the name, or these heavier British frigates before I started playing Black Seas a few years ago. So I guess they're more in the shadows, but they were very important at the time, I think. Doing hard work, trade protection, raids, escorts, and grinding chase work. And of course, maybe doesn't get them marble monuments. Of course, in the case of Indefatigable, yes, because of the role she played under Pellew as one of the more successful prize takers of the Revolutionary Wars. But I mean, there is not Trafalgar and so on. I mean, so, but they're there. I mean, and I think they're worth mentioning, and they are famous, but in my opinion should be even more famous. So we have the Endymion as that class of heavier frigate with her amazing sailing properties. We have Indefatigable of the first line of Razées, those 64 guns cut down to Razées, 44 gun Razées. And then for the War of 1812 we have HMS Majestic as an example of those 74 cut down to a very heavy 56 gun frigate. So they mattered, that's what I'm saying. And then what did they change? Well, they changed the design. The Royal Navy embraced the 24-pounder frigates in numbers, and then kept the idea after that. They changed the doctrine. Cruisers were no longer merely scouts or commerce raiders. In the right hands, they were capital weapons in single ship warfare. And they changed the expectations. So speed plus weight and metal became the frigate gold standard. And the repetition. So after 1812, the Navy understood that they couldn't really send out those 18-pounder frigates anymore against like heavier 44 gun, like 18-pounder 38 gun frigates against 24-pounder 44 guns. It is a big risk. So that would really influence later design cycles, I think. So there is still some stuff that are under debate. So for instance, this exact top speed versus measured trials for the Endymion class, for instance, comparative hull strengths of oak versus fur-built wartime copies, like what were the real difference between those. And then there's this legend of an American 44 able to meet a 74 on even terms. I mean, I think, yeah, it's a brilliant slogan, but I would find that very arguable in practice. I mean, barring weather, as in the case of Indefatigable facing down Droits together with Amazon. I guess it could happen, but it would have to be under the right circumstances. A 74 is still a very large ship with a large crew, and I think any frigate under those circumstances where a 74 could fight would use their speed to get away. Just an opinion. And then also credit accolation and of course the normal thing with propaganda is these are things that happened a long time ago. There is quite a bit of documentation, but we cannot forget the role of propaganda in this. So what is not debated, however, is the trend. So bigger, stronger, faster frigates and Razées that could take punishment and then give it back in measure. That is the direction things took. So to maybe end this off, I mean, I think in a way maybe ships in the French Navy lit the fuse a bit. The French were experimenting with larger frigates quite early. So frigates like Pomone that was captured by the British maybe lit the fuse. Then the American super heavies and Endymion, they set the pace. And then ships like Indefatigable proved that a cut down brawler could even master a ship of the line in a storm. And then Majestic showed that Razées were relevant as a wartime response to those heavier frigates, heavier American frigates as well. So between these ships, they pulled the frigate upward toward a 19th century cruiser that valued speed, stamina and long-range hitting power. They were neither fish or fowl really in the rating books. I mean, they moved, they were still called, most of them fifth rates, but they moved toward the fourth rate in many cases, I think. So, and I mean, what was the thing with them in reality was that they were exactly what was required at the time. So that is my short ramble, or maybe not so short, but a ramble about my favorite type of frigates during this time. I mean, there's many favorites. I also like those smaller 18-pounder, the fifth rates. I mean, the Shannon is a big favorite of mine. But these Razées, I find them amazing. I have mentioned them in other videos earlier as examples. And also the American heavy frigates or super heavy frigates, or super frigates, I should say. And the Razées. And also those repurposed Indiamen. I mean, they hold a special place, and I like the idea, and they add another dimension to single ship actions. If you're wargaming, maybe playing beat the quarters, or you want a faster game, you're playing Black Seas, maybe with some house rules. You find out some house rules for your ships. There is Razées in Black Seas, I should mention. We changed that pretty quickly. I think it was intentional, but for us there was a little bit too many ship points for Razée in the main rules there. So I don't know if you've experienced that. Maybe you mention it in the comments. But so for our ship list, we have different types of Razées. So we have a 44 gun Razée, we have a 56 gun Razée. So a cut down 64 and a cut down 74, and so on. So most when I research stuff like this, lots of the things I have to admit, I mean digging around, I find a lot of stuff on Wiki, and of course Wiki is not the end all be all resource, as you know. A lot from books and so on. But I checked information on the French frigate Pomone, built in 1785 and captured in 1794, which inspired Endymion. And I researched into the Endymion class, an overview of the class, and also those copies built from fur. I looked into the capture of USS President, also rewatching that video that I recommend by Drakinifil. And then I've spent a lot of time also during this video, but also before, when painting my ship, looking into the Razée concept and those first 1794 conversions of Indefatigable, Anson and Magnanime. Of course, the fight between Razée and Indefatigable and Amazon is very interesting, and there is various sources for that, among it also a video by Drake. And then the Terpsichore fight of Majestic, I had to do quite a bit of digging here, and I've also done digging on that before. And the Constitution class of 24-pounder US frigates, which is by far of all these almost the easiest to find information on, I find. There's also a surviving example of that class, right? The Constitution itself. So, with that, as I usually do nowadays, I wish you all fair winds, and please, if you watched the whole thing, or if you have any questions on the content here, or anything at all, just leave comments below. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so, consider doing so. This is a channel that has grown on my mind, so to say, and I'm still having fun working on it, and there will be some pretty cool stuff coming up here. Been really busy, so that maybe I haven't released that many videos. I've been doing a little bit of Second World War, as you can see on the channel, trying some victory at sea with my friends, and also in the background working on stuff for B2 quarters that I will be able to announce at some point here. There's a lot of different areas there with the reworking of the original notes of the author, like the original rules for a possible free re-release without anything having to do with the game released in 1980 by Command Perspectives. So this would be a new version of the original ID of the author, and some new PDF that we're hoping to be able to release so people can play the game. And at the same time, I've been working hard on the app. Not being a coder, it's been really difficult, but I've gotten a bit of help just now, the other day, actually yesterday, and I got past some of the big humps even before that. So I have high hopes that there will be some type of workable version of the app released with the PDF rules. So for the ones that don't want to roll all the dice and do all the math, which could be fun, but if you want a quicker, faster version, then that companion app will be released together with the game itself. And then I'm working another thing with Warlord games, planning, and I've started looking at painting up some ships for a scenario. So we'll be running that at GothCon in 2026, April 2026. Me and Marcus will be running an event there for Warlord games, where you can come if you're living in Denmark, Germany, Finland, Sweden, or even further away. GothCon is a really cool big event, and we're going to be there. We're going to probably have two tables. We'll have an official table where we'll be running a tournament with some set ships, and it will be a Caribbean scenario. For if it's possible, I have two versions in my mind, but one version with just one captain against one captain, but also a version with two captains on each side, where you can compete against each other and win prizes, official Warlord prizes, and that's an official Warlord tournament as well, Black Seas tournament. And then we'll have an open table, so if you would like to bring your own fleets, and I guess we're going to have our fleets with us as well, so there will be an open table where you can just pick up games during the event. So maybe bring your fleet, bring your friends, and we'll see what we can sort out as we're there. Really looking forward to that, and of course stuff like that takes a lot of planning, so maybe the video schedule has slowed down a bit. I'm still hoping though, because I am getting close to 3,000 viewing hours, and I hope I will surpass that pretty soon here. And then I could start to link a little bit of merch and so on to my channel, working on stuff for, among it, B2 quarters, like cover art and some t-shirt prints and so on. I mentioned that quite a bit earlier. So hopefully some of that stuff will be available at that point, and maybe some of you would be interested in it. We'll see. But until then, I wish you fair winds, as I said.